Okay, so we are on Daf Ayin Tet Amud Bet. We're at the Mishnah. It's a long Mishnah, and again, pretty new topic, although obviously related to Gittin. We're now going to talk about the rules associated with the date on the get, and then that will lead us into a discussion of potential other defects on a get. And so the first, and then we're going to, in this discussion, we'll also talk not only about the defect themselves and the fact that the get is considered invalid, but also what the ramifications are. And so that's going to be a big element of this Mishnah and of our day today. So we'll jump right in. It's the Mishnah Ayin Tet Amud Bet. It's the second of the Mishnahs on the daf. It's the lower one. It's the one that will continue onto the daf Pei, which is our daf for today. And so the Mishnah says, "Kasav l'shum malchus she'ena hogenes." If you wrote, and we'll see that we're referring to the date on the get. If you wrote, in fact, let's take a look at the first Rashi. Kasav l'shem malchus she'ena hogenes misha haya bebavel, that if somebody is in Bavel, the kasav b'shanat kach v'kach l'malchut acheret, and you write down that the year is the following year for some other kingship, because in those days, when you wrote down a date, the way you wrote the date was based on the years that the particular ruler had been the ruler in that country. And so if you were to write that date down, but write it based on the rulership of some other country, then we'll see that that's going to be a problem. What is it that we're talking about when we say an inappropriate or improper country? We're going to see that specifically refers to Rome, and we're going to explain why it's called that. But the bottom line is that one can understand this first statement as a general statement that you're just using the wrong one. Or you write it in the name, and now Rashi is picking up the next language of the Mishnah, that if you write it in the for Madai, another country, which is in the area of modern day Iran, because the reason, and we're going to see that it's going to be not kosher, and the reason that it's not kosher is because you need to write it based on the rulership of the particular place in which you are, as the Gemara will explain. So let's jump back right into the Mishnah. Again, next line of the Mishnah, second line of the Mishnah. So l'shem malchus madai, and so if you were to do it in the using the dates of Madai, again, that is a kingdom that is no longer around. L'shum malchus Yavan, or the Greek kingdom. Again, at this point in time, although Greece was probably still a country, I'm not 100% sure, it was certainly not the kingdom of Greece that it was at a certain point earlier. Levinian Habayit, or maybe you'll use, let's say you want to use a Jewish date. So you use the Jewish date based on the construction of the Beit HaMikdash. L'churban Habayit, or if you use the date based on the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Haya b'mizrach v'kasav b'marav. So that was all with respect to date. Now we switch slightly and say that if you were in the east, and you wrote it as if you were in the west, meaning if you were usually east refers to Babel and west refers to Israel, but it doesn't make a difference. The point is just you wrote the wrong location for where the get was written. The Ma'arav v'kasav b'mizrach, or if you were in the west and you wrote it as if you were in the east, you wrote it as if you were in the east. In each of these cases, that if she were to get remarried, she can't be with her second husband, and she can't be with the first husband either. And Rashi explains, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 lines up in the narrow lines from the bottom of Rashi. If she were to get married using this get, Teitze min harishon, she has to leave her first husband, meaning that she can't go back to him because she's now had relations with the second husband. Umin hasheni, and she has to leave her second husband. Utrika get sheni min harishon, but get min hasheni, and she's going to need a new get from the first husband, and she's going to need a get also from the second husband. That even though, according to Rashi, the second marriage is not a valid marriage, because according to Rashi, the problem with the get that we're just talking about is a biblical problem. So it's as if she did not ever have a get. So really, and if you do not have a get, if a woman who is already married attempts to marry somebody else, that is not a valid marriage, and we ignore it. But nonetheless, we're going to require a divorce from her, because ubiyavamos, befarshim taima Xereshema Yomru, and in Yavamos, in a similar case, we explain what the reason is that you're going to require a divorce from the second husband, because Shema Yomru Girish Rishon, we're going to be worried that maybe people will say that she was in fact divorced from the first one, Girish Rishon get Gamor, that it was in fact a valid get. Venisa Shani, and then she got married. Venimsas Ashes Ish Yotsas below get. And we'll think that maybe she is an Ashes Ish who left her first marriage without a get. So as a result, we're going to say that she cannot get married to either of them, and she requires a get from both of them. The Ainluk Suba, not only that, but we're going to punish her. What are the punishments? And now we're going to detail those punishments. She's not going to be entitled to her ketubah, below peyrot. She's not entitled to, Rashi explains that when we say peyrot, usually that means the fruit. Well, that's really what the husband gets in her property, right? But what she gets in exchange for that peyrot is the right to be redeemed should she be captured. And so below mizonos, and she doesn't get her food, below belos. And when it comes to worn out clothing, Rashi reminds us that we've seen this before, that in Yevamos, we saw that if she has worn out clothing that she's no longer wearing, even though maybe you might say, well, that maybe the husband bought it for her, and she or she brought it into the marriage, and it's worn out, so therefore maybe the husband should keep it. She can take it with her, but in this case, she does not get it. So lo al zeh, below al zeh, not from the first one, not from the second one, meaning she's not entitled to spousal privileges from either of the two husbands. And not only that, but sometimes we have that if she were to get something, she doesn't have to give it back. In this case, where the punishment is essentially that we treat it as if she's not entitled to either of them, and she would have to return it. And if she were to have a child by either of them, that child would be a mamzer. Below zev is law, and if either of them is a kohen, neither of them are allowed to become tameh to her if she were to pass away. Unlike a regular kohen who can become tameh to his spouse, below zev is zakai and below mitzias. But now we're talking about the other direction. The husband's not entitled to anything that she finds below b'maaseh yadeha, and she's not entitled to her earnings below b'hafaras nedareha, and he's not entitled to revoke her vows. Haisa bas Yisrael, and if she was a bas Yisrael, nifselas min kahuna, she's not allowed to marry a kohen. The truth is that if she's anybody, she's not allowed to marry a kohen. But we're going to build on that. Bas Levi min hamaser, if she was a daughter of a Levi, she would not be allowed to eat maser. This seems to follow the view of Rabbi Meir, who says that maaser, unlike the way we generally understand maaser as being something that even a non-Levi is allowed to eat. Rabbi Meir understood maaser as being something that only Leviim could eat. Bas kohen mina truma, and if she were a daughter of a kohen, she would not be allowed to eat truma because she's considered somebody who's had improper marital relations. In yorshin shel zev, yorshin shel zeh, yorshin subata, and the heirs of the two husbands do not have the right to inherit her ketubah. Now, of course, she doesn't get her ketubah, so Rashi helps us out here and explains that, in fact, what we're talking about is the ketubah banin dichrin, that there's a special right that a wife has, that if she has children with the particular husband, or then that and then that husband has children with another spouse, this wife's property that she brings in to the marriage, even though the husband will inherit it at the moment because he has survived her, when he passes away, he is committing to give to her children what she brought into the marriage. And so as a result, that's what we're talking about here. And so as a result, those children do not get any special rights, and all of the children instead will end up inheriting the property that she brought into that marriage. The imesu, and if in fact the husbands died before they were able to divorce her, they again, in some ways, because we're uncertain about the situation, the brothers of each of them have to do chalitza, and they're not allowed to do yibum because we don't know which one is the real brother, is the real husband. So Shina Shema. Okay, so now that's the story. That's the story. If you mess up the date, if you mess up the location, now we're going to talk about other potential defects. And again, in each case, we're going to note that these defects apply, that the same penalties that we just read apply to the situation. So we're now up to situation number 2. So let me scroll my screen. So situation number 2 is as follows. Shina Shemo Ushma, if the person who wrote the get changed his name or her name. Now, Tosos here makes an interesting point, meaning who said, if you take a look at the top Tosos, Lo Shina Mamish, we can't be possibly talking about where the wrong name, the totally wrong name is used, because if the totally wrong name is used, how could it possibly be a valid get? We need it to be Lishma. This is not that. So the point is that we're going to have, how could it possibly be a valid get? So as a result, Tosos continues, Beparak Beis, Daf Kedamar Beparak Beis, Daf Kaf, V'chein Shem Ira, V'Shem Ira. And similarly, when it comes to his city and her city, Lo Shishina Mamish, we're not talking about that they changed it actually. Ella sheyesh la'oto ha'ir shnei shemot b'shnei mikomot. We're talking about a situation where a city had 2 different names, one in the place where it is and one in other places. I can't remember the alternative name for St. Petersburg, but now I'm thinking about a place like St. Petersburg that has, multiple names. And so as a result, depending on where you are and when you are, you might have an alternate name. And so as a result, if they use the wrong name in the wrong, in a place where that name is not being used, that's where it's going to be a problem. That's what we're going to talk about. And so again, back into the Mishnah, we are 4th line down where the little aleph are in the text. Shina Shmo Shma, again reading that part again. If they changed his name or her name, Shem Ira, or his city or her city, meaning where they are located. Then you have to, again, the woman, if she got remarried, she's going to have to leave her second husband, and of course she can't go back to her first. And all of the other things, all the other ways that we talked about are also going to apply to her. Okay. And Tosos adds here in the beginning of the Tosos, Shem Ira v'Shem Ira, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Dahainu Dafka Ir Shedarim Ba. This is when we say the changing the city, we're talking about the city where they're living now. Aval Ir Shenolad Ba. But if you're talking about the city where they were born, afilu shina, even if it were to change, kasher, kevan she'enut sarach lichtov klal. According to the Rabbi Yitzchak in the Tosos, so then that would not be a change that would be material because it wasn't required to be written there. So if somebody was actually born, in New York, and you said that they were born in New Jersey, that's not going to make a difference. But if you say that they lived in New York when they in fact lived in New Jersey, that's going to be a problem. Okay, All right. So, of course, that was a state. We can do New York City and Newark. But okay. So anyway, so that's item number 2 in our list. Now we go to item number 3, and item number 3 is Kol Rayot Sha'amru Tzaraseim Mutarot. Now we're changing the topic completely, and we're talking about the topic that was raised in the very first Mishnah in Yevamot. So we have an opportunity to remember some of the laws some of the things that we've done a long time ago. So let's go back and remember what that's talking about. So back in Yevamot, we saw that there were 15 relations that a person could have, that if in fact his brother could marry the person, but he could not marry the person. The classic example is if we're talking about a man's own daughter. A man's own daughter, his brother is allowed from the Torah to marry that daughter, even though that might not be the greatest idea, but in any event. So if in fact that brother were to marry the daughter, and let's say that brother were married to several other women at the same time, well, we saw in Yevamot that if that brother were to die without children, then even though the other co-wives would be potentially allowed to marry the brother, the surviving brother through Yibum, because the surviving brother is also the father of one of the other co-wives, so none of them are able to do Yibum or Chalitza. So let's go, now that we've reminded us of that rule, so let's take a look. Kol arayot she'amru tzaraseim mutarot. When it comes to all of the relations where we say that the co-wives are permitted to go and get remarried without having to do Yibum or Chalitza. So if they actually went ahead and got married to somebody else, Nimsu Elu Islandis, and now it turns out that the one who was the daughter in the situation in the example that we gave, turns out that she's an islandess, meaning that she never is going to physically mature and never be able to have children. And therefore, we say that marriage, the original marriage that she had to the husband who passed away, is considered as if it never existed. So now all of a sudden, all of these co-wives were supposed to do Yibum and Chalitza. And so in that situation, we're going to say the same rule applies. Teitze mizeh mizeh. The co-wives must leave not only their current husband, but their future husband, their new husband as well. The kol hadrachim ha'eluba, and all of these other rules apply to her. Basically, she's very stuck. And similarly, hakones is yivamto. Let's say now we're dealing with a situation where none of the spouses of the brother who passed away without children were problematic, and we say that and now the surviving brother marries one of them. Well, once Yibum is done with one of the co-wives, all the other co-wives are allowed to go marry somebody else. But and now the co-wives go and marry other people. And it turns out that this one who is an islandess this one who had Yibum done with her, turns out that she's an islandess. That again, all of these co-wives now have to leave their current husband and are not able to go back to the and of course they can't go back to the first husband because the first husband died. They can't even go to the one who did Yibum with the islandess because they've already violated that Yibum situation as well. So they are again stuck. So all right. So that's again case number 3 in our Mishnah. Case number 4 in our Mishnah. Kasa of Sofer. Kasa of Sofer get. Second, is that that's case number 4 in our Mishnah. Now we're up to case number 5 in our Mishnah. Kasav sofer get leish v'shover leisha. Now the sofer writes the get for the husband, and he writes a receipt for the woman. meaning when the woman receives the get, if she receives all of the payments that are due to her, she can be asked for a receipt that confirms that she, in fact, was received everything. So that way, the husband has a document that proves that he's done everything that he was supposed to do. But now, unfortunately, the scribe made a mistake. V'tav v'nasan get leisha, the shover leish, and he gave the wrong document to the wrong person. He gave the get to the woman and the receipt to the man. V'nasnu zelazeh, and without recognizing that they had the wrong document, each of them just knew that they were going to get a document and give it to the other, and so they did, and so now they gave the wrong documents to each other. And now after a period of time, the man actually takes a look at the document and he says, "Oh my gosh, I'm holding the get." And the receipt is being held by the woman. Well, in that situation, it wasn't a valid get. And as a result, if she got remarried, she's not going to be able to stay with that husband. And she's not going to be able to go back to their first husband either. And all of the other rules apply to her. But there's a disagreeing opinion here. Rabbi Lazar says no. If it turns out that he figures it out immediately, well, then it's okay. Ein zeh get. Then it's going to be it's not going to be a get, and they can just review it again, redo it again, and the bottom line is it's not a get. But if it turns out that it only comes out after a period of time, harei zeh get, then we're going to say it is a get. Lo kol heimenu min harishon la'abed zuchuto shel sheni, because we don't want to allow the first husband to undo rights that the second husband has. And what does that mean? The point is that, let's say the second husband, let's say the wife now is fed up with the second husband as well, and the first husband also doesn't like the second husband, and so he says to the wife, well, we could just pretend that we could switch our documents and say that we never actually were divorced, and maybe that will work out for us. Of course, it won't work out for them, but they might think that, and so they'll switch the documents, and now it'll be to the disadvantage of the second husband. So Rebbe Lazar says we're not going to allow that to happen, and we'll discuss that at the very end of today. So my malchus. So now let's go through the Mishnah, and we'll go through it, covering each of the elements. So my malchus she'eino hogenes. What does that refer to? Malchus haromim. It refers to the Roman Empire. So the Amai Karila Malchus she'eino hogenes. Why was it called inappropriate? Mishum de'ein lahem lo kasav below lashon, because it didn't have its own language, nor its own alphabet or its own language. So therefore, it's not an appropriate kingdom, meaning it doesn't have the things that a real kingship should actually have. So Amar Ula b'nei matakinu malchus begittin. Why did we have to write down the years of the local monarchy, the local rulership in Gittin? Mishum shalom malchus. The answer is because we want to have peace with the local rulers. Are you going to tell me that because of this, we're going to go so far as to say that she needs to leave her husband and the child is going to be a mamzer? That seems pretty extreme. And yet the answer is ain. Yes, that's exactly what we're going to say. Rabbi Meir l'taimei, and Rabbi Meir follows his reasoning, because Rabbi Meir, again, he seems to be the author of our Mishnah, and it follows his reasoning. De Amar Rav Hamnuna Mishmei De'ula, Omer Haya Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir used to say, Kol HaMishana Mimatbeya V'Shitavu Chachamim Begittin. Anyone who deviates from what was required by the rabbis when it comes to Gittin, Havlan Mamzer, the child is going to be a Mamzer. Okay, so now we go back and we say, well, 1 second, why Lishum Malchus Yavan? Vitricha, why was it necessary? So the Gemara impliedly already asked that question, and we're going to answer it by saying, yes, in fact, it was necessary to teach us. Meaning, why, once you told me that I can't use the Roman Empire if I'm not in the Roman Empire, do I need to be told about the Greek Empire, which especially is not even really around? So utricha to ashmin malchus she'ena hogenes. If we were to just talk about the one of the Roman Empire, which was still around, around. About Malchus Madai Umalchus Yavan, Maida Haba Haba. I might have thought that what already happened. But Iyashmin and Malchus Madai Umalchus Yavan, and if I were just telling you about the Madai and Greek, so Mishum de Malkivasa Havu, because these were real kingdoms of Albinian, and so as a result, the local rulers might be jealous of Albinian Habayis. But when it comes to the actual Beit Hamikdash, Maida Haba Haba, who cares whether you were to use the time based on the Beit Hamikdash, the building of the Beit Hamikdash? It already was destroyed, so nobody's going to be concerned about it. And so as a result, we need to tell that one. The Iyashmi and Binyan Habayis, and if we were to tell you about the building of the Beit Hamikdash, the Amri Kamadakri Shivachaihu, that they were talking about the Jews are basically trying to talk about how great they were, and so that might indicate an aspect of lack of loyalty. And so as a result, Aval Churban Habayit did Sarahu, but maybe if they reference the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, I would say it's okay, Amalo. Maybe it won't be invalid because who cares about the date of the destruction? So Tzricha, we're going to say even in that situation, we're worried that the local authorities will be offended, and so as a result, we're going to have a problem. Now, in the end, by the way, today we use the date of the creation of the world, just as we use in a ketubah, and so as a result, and we say that basically because of the lack of using of dates based on local rulership today, we don't have this concern. Okay, but if it may, I don't know whether if in fact this were to be a place that somehow began to decide that they were going to determine the date based on local rulership, whether this would once again come into effect. But it's an interesting question to think about. Okay, so our Mishnah next said, Hayab Mizrach v'Kasav Marav, if they were in the east and wrote it as if they were in the west, Man. Who are we talking about? Whose place are we talking about? Because if you say that it refers to the husband, we already covered that with the changing of the city of the name. El Lav Sofer, it must be the Sofer. Because Rav used to tell his the scribes, and Rav Huna did the same. The key Yasvinusu B'Shile, if you're sitting in Shile, Ksova B'Shile, you got to write that the document was written in Shile. And that's true, even if you know that it's going to, even if you were asked to write it in Hine. And if you are actually in Hine, you have to write that you wrote it in Hine, even though you were asked to write it in Shile. Bottom line is you have to write the location where the get was being written. Amar of Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, as we turn to pay him a bet, Zo Divrei Rebbe Meir. This is all according to Rebbe Meir. Aval Chachamim Omrim, the Chachamim say, Afilu lo kasav el l'shem santer should be ear. Oh, so now this is changing the topic slightly. So let's go down. Okay. So now the Gemara returns to the dating of the document and identifies the author of our Mishnah, right? So Zo Divrei Rebbe Meir. This is again according to Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, that our Mishnah is in fact according to Rebbe Meir. But the Chachamim would say, even if you didn't write the rulership of the particular location, but instead you wrote the years since the local registrar, the land registrar, the person who takes the surveys of the land, that's the santar, who is in that city, that would be also Harei Zom Meguresh, meaning as long as you write any kind of good date, you're going to be fine. And of course, this also provides us a basis for not writing, for not using the local rulership date as well. So Hahu Gita to have a Ksiv Bey L'Shem is Tandra de Vashkar, that a specific sofer wrote a get and wrote it using the years of the particular governor in that region, and not the years of the actual king. So Sholchi Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda l'kamei de Rabba. So they asked Rav Rabba what the halacha would be. So Kihai Gavna Mai. What's the story in this case? So Shalach Lei Rabba returned. Baha Afilu Rabbi Meir Modi. In this case, even Rabbi Meir would agree. Why? Because after all, you didn't use the kingship, you didn't use the ultimate ruler. So my time of Osa Malchusu, because this governor is appointed by the king, and so as a result, it is still showing a respect to the king. Well, in that case, Umaishna Misanter Shabeir. In that case, what about the land registrar? Everything is ultimately determined by the king, and so shouldn't that still also work? No, Hasam Zila Hulahu Milsa. That's a little embarrassing to be, if you actually use the local monarch, the local official, one of the lowest levels of government, and you effectively are saying, well, I'm going to use that date, well, then the king will take offense. But here, when you choose somebody who's at the top, you're saying that the king made a great choice, and so as a result, therefore, that's going to be okay according to Rebbe Meir, and that explains why Rebbe Meir says that that's okay, but the land surveyor is not going to be okay, whereas the rabbis say that even the land surveyor will be okay because we're not actually concerned about this issue. Okay, so now that brings us to the next. The Gemara now notes that the rabbis would not agree that the child who resulted from the marriage would be a mamzer. We said earlier that it would be that was Rebbe Meir. Again, Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rahuna, Amar Rav, Zodibre Rebbe Meir. When it comes to the status of the child being a mamzer, that's Rebbe Meir. Aval Chachamim Amrim Havlad Kasher. But the Chachamim say no, the Vlad is not a mamzer. Umodim Chachamim LeRebbe Meir. However, the rabbis would agree to Rebbe Meir, Sheim Shina Shmo Ushma, Shemi Ro Shemi Ra, Shavlad Mamzer. That in that situation, we would say that the child would be mamzer. If they change the name of the husband and wife's name, the name of the city of the husband and the name of the city of the wife, in all those cases, the actual get is invalid. That's the difference. So in one case, we're sort of being, it's a rabbinic institution, right? The rabbi said that we're going to make the get invalid if you use the wrong rulership. And so, according to Rebbe Meir, even if you fail to follow a rabbinic rule, your child could be a mamzer. But according to the rabbis, no, if you fail to follow a rabbinic rule, your child is not going to be a mamzer. And so, as a result, that's the position of the Chachamim. So Amar of Ashi now proving this same position. Af Ananami Tanina, we also have this in a Mishnah, Shina Shmo Ushma, B'Shem Iro, B'Shem Ira, that our Mishnah specifically dealt with this separately. Teitze Mizeh Mizeh V'chol Adrachim Ha'eluba, that all these rules apply to her. Ha Man Katani La. So who is it that said this? So Elema Rebbe Meir, if you're saying that it was Rebbe Meir, La Arvinhu V'Lisninhu. Why not combine this section with the first section of the Mishnah and teach them as one? After all, they're all the same rule. Ella Shmamina Rabbanan. So rather, it must be the rabbis Shmamina, and in fact, that is the case. So as a result, we can say that in fact this is the right situation. Okay. So now. The Gemara is now going to discuss a potential implication of the language of the Mishnah regarding the case of the co-wives of the Arayot. And we're going to have two different versions. And the bottom line is that we're not going to be successful in making the kind of proof that we're going to try to make in either situation. So Kol Arayos Sha'amru. So Nisu in. The implication is that if the co-wife went ahead and got married again, that's where she's going to be forbidden to go back to the Yavam. However, Zinu, lo. But if in fact she did not get married, the implication would be that she would not be forbidden to go back to the Yavam. Well, V'lema teheve to Yuvta de Rav Hamnuna, to Amar Rav Hamnuna shomeres Yavam shezinta asura lo Yavama. That well, let's say that this actually contradicts Rav Hamnuna, because Rav Hamnuna said that if any of the wives of any of the widows of the deceased brother who died without children, were to have marital relations outside of relations outside of marriage with somebody else, she's no longer allowed to marry the Yava. That's what he says. And so doesn't this seem to contradict our Mishnah? Doesn't Rav Hamnuna contradict our Mishnah? Because our Mishnah, again, the implication was only if she got married to somebody else would she be forbidden to go and marry the Yavam, but not if she were to actually just have an affair. No, lo. The Gemara continues. Nisu v'hu adin lizinu. It's the same rule if the rule that is for marriage also applies to having relations outside marriage. And the reason that we talk about marriage is just so that we don't have to talk about improper activity like unmarried relations. The Ikadim Amri, and there are those who had the entire discussion the opposite way. Nisu v'hu din lazino. Of course, our Mishnah should be understood to be that we're referring to a married, and also if they in fact had relations without marriage. And maybe we should say that this actually supports Rav Hamnuna. To Amar Rav Hamnuna, Shomeres Yavam Lazinta Asur Liyavama. Again, he says that if a woman has outside relations with somebody else, and now she's going to be prohibited to do yibum. So low, no, nisu dafka. Maybe we could say that the marriage is specific, because we're worried that the situation might get confused with a situation of marriage. We're concerned that maybe because if there's marriage, are we going to say that it's going to be similar to a situation where a husband went overseas? So Rashi helps us out here. We won't go through it due to the time, but let's just do it outside. That if a husband goes overseas and a report comes back and says that the husband has died, and she now goes and marries somebody else. The widow goes and marries somebody else, and then the husband comes back and it turns out that he's alive. So now she's going to be prohibited to both and is going to require a get from both. So that is a very similar situation to where the Yavama goes and marries the second husband, thinking that she was free from her Yibum situation. And then it turns out that no, she was not free from her Yibum situation. But it's different if, in fact, she were to just have an extramarital affair, because as Rashi explains, the extramarital affair is not something that people will know about. And even if they did, they wouldn't expect it to be a marriage. And so as a result, there's not going to be a required get from the person with whom she had an affair. And since there's not going to be a required get from the person with whom she had an affair, we don't have to punish her with all of these punishments. Okay. And specifically, we can allow her to marry the Yavam. Okay, so that brings us to the next situation. Our Mishnah addressed two situations of Yibum. One was where there's a wife was an erva for the surviving brothers, so the co-wives were not subject to Yibum and Chalitza at all. And then it turns out that erva wife was an islandess, so the marriage was invalid, making the co-wife subject to Yibum and Chalitza. And the second situation was where the surviving brother did do Yibum with one co-wife, but then it turned out that the Yavama was an islandess, so that Yibum was invalid, making the co-wives again subject to Yibum and Chalitza. In both cases, we learned in our Mishnah that any co-wife who married in the interim would need to separate from her new husband and be subject to all the other penalties mentioned in our Mishnah. So the Gemara is now going to explain why we need to teach both of these rules, both of these laws. So Hakones is Yavimto, Utsricha, and we need both of them. Because if we talked only about the case of the widow who remarried under the impression that she had a co-wife who was an erva and therefore wasn't subject to yibum at all, because nobody in that situation fulfilled the mitzvah of yibum. In the second case in our Mishnah, where one of the co-wives did fulfill the mitzvah of yibum, maybe we won't punish the other co-wives, because after all, they thought that somebody did yibum. And if we do only in the taught the law only in the second case, mishum dekam ramya kamei. Maybe it's because even though the co-wife, one of the co-wives did do yibum, but all of the co-wives became connected, had that Zika relationship with the Yavam. And so as a result, once she had a Zika relationship, maybe that's why she's deserving of punishment. Aval Hassam, Delo Ramya Kameh, but in the case where one of the wives was an erva, and so as a result, the whole institution of Yibum did not apply. Amalo, maybe I would say that she shouldn't be penalized. So Tricha, therefore, we need to say both cases. All right. Finally, last case for us for today, and that is, in the final case of our Mishnah, where the sofer gave the husband the receipt and the wife the get, and then the couple then exchanged the wrong documents, right? So the Tanakama said that they must separate. But Rabbi Lazar said that if the issue was identified immediately, then they are not divorced, as they did not properly give the right documents. But if it was identified after time, then they are divorced, because the Gemara. So now the Gemara is going to detail a disagreement about what it means by immediately and what it means by after time. So because of a sofer, the ta and v'nasan get the isha v'shover, etc. Rabbi Elazar Omer im la'alter yatza v'chulu. So again, that's what we're just summarizing what the Mishnah said. So hechidami la'alter. What do we mean by immediately? Or earlier. The hechidami la'achar, and what do we mean by after a certain period of time? Amar of Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. So opinion number one is Kolzman sheyoshin ba'asukin ba'oto inyan. As long as they're sitting at the table and still talking about the get, meaning they haven't gone their merry ways, thinking that they were already divorced. Zehu alter. That's what it means by immediately. But amdu, once they got up and they went their merry ways, so zehu la'achar zman. That would mean after a certain period of time. But Rav Ada bar Ahava Amar, no, Rav Ada says disagrees. Lo nisis zehu la'alter. No, as long as she has not gotten remarried, that's what we're talking about when we say immediately. Nisis zehu la'achar zman. But if in fact she did get married, that's what we mean by after a period of time. And actually, now we're going to support this last explanation based on our Mishnah, because Tnan lo kol haimenu min harishon la'abed zuchluso shel sheni. Because Rabbi Lazar explained what's the reason in the Achar Zman case that we aren't going to believe the couple to say that they had mixed up their documents, because we don't want the first husband to mess up the second husband. So Bishlam Rav Ada bar Ahava, it makes sense according to the second view, because Hainu de Katani Sheni, because after Achar Zman means that there's a second husband. But El Shmuel, but according to Shmuel, my Sheni, what does it mean by Sheni? So Zuchus Haru'uya L'Sheni. So the answer is no, you have not actually, our Mishnah is not actually a proof against Shmuel, but rather when we say the Sheni, we don't mean an existing second husband, but we mean, the point is that the second husband who would exist. And if he did exist, so then it would be a problem. So that's what we're talking about when we say that Rebbe Lazar says that. So, okay, so now our next Mishnah, this brings us to our next Mishnah, which is going to address the question of whether a Kohen husband writing a get, even without giving it, is sufficient to disqualify his wife from marrying another Kohen, because there is an aspect to her of being a divorcee. But for that debate, please stay tuned to tomorrow's daf on Shabbos. And so I wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. Have a great day, and look forward to continuing our learning together next week, when, God willing, I will be back in person on Wednesday. Have a Shabbat Shalom.